Hi everyone, and welcome to the Otolaryngology Clinics podcast. I'm Stacy Eastman, the managing editor for the series here at Elsevier. Otolaryngology Clinics is a bi-monthly publication consisting of review articles focused on a central topic. Today, we will be discussing the February 2022 issue dedicated to business of otolaryngology, guest edited by Dr. Stephen Craigle and Eileen Dower. Here now is the consulting editor, Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar, to lead the discussion.
Hello, I'm Sujana Chandrasekhar. I'm the consulting editor of Otolaryngology Clinics of North America, and today I will be speaking with the guest editors of the February 2022 issue of Clinics, which is on the business of otolaryngology. Dr. Stephen Craigle and Dr. Eileen Dower are both practicing otolaryngologists and partners at St. Cloud Ear, Nose, and Throat Clinic in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Dr. Dower is immediate past president of their group, and she is now chief of staff-elect at St. Cloud Hospital. Dr. Craigle is a member and former chair of the Board of Governors of Central Minnesota Health Network. Welcome, Steve and Eileen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Otolaryngologic Clinics of North America issues are usually about the so-called hard science subjects like head and neck cancer or hearing loss, rhinosinusitis, etc. This issue is about running the actual business of being an ear, nose, and throat surgeon and about organizing your life so your practice and your finances enable you to continue to work in the profession that you've chosen. It's about imagining a future that embraces diversity, equity, inclusion, patient safety, physician well-being, planning for a comfortable life after your professional career is done, and managing challenging business scenarios. After he approached me with the idea for this issue of Clinics, Steve and Eileen put together 17 articles that cover all of that and more. I remind our listeners to go to www.oto.theclinics.com, which is where you can find all our issues and articles and all our podcasts. You can also find the podcasts, essentially one per issue, wherever you get your podcasts as well. So I'm really excited to speak with Drs. Craigle and Dower about the February 2022 issue, so let's get started. The first thing I want to ask you guys is, for Steve, why did you want to feature an issue on the business of otolaryngology, and why did you want to guest edit it?
I had never given any thought of guest editing anything, anywhere, until February of last year, when I was able to interview you and Dr. Dwayne Taylor as part of a podcast for our Flex series with the Academy on bias and cultural competency in otolaryngology. And it was a wonderful interview, I guess it was, but the discussion was quite wide-ranging and touched on a number of subjects about the business of otolaryngology. And in the process, I sort of thought to myself, I actually know some stuff about this. This is actually an area of expertise that I have. Maybe somebody could find this useful. What we've put together has a lot of potential for being very useful for a lot of folk. I don't possess any academic credentials, but we've succeeded and failed in a lot of things, and experience generally comes from making mistakes and learning from them.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that many times we're not aware of what we know until something kind of sideways happens like that, right? And it was really a great deal of the sort of discussion that had less to do with the topic at hand last year and sort of morphed into three people just talking about life as otolaryngologists, which was really wonderful. Eileen, I'm so glad that you agreed to be a co-guest editor. What do you hope that readers will learn from reading this issue and listeners will learn from this podcast?
You know, I think that when Steve and I first talked about it, my mind immediately went to, what we think of classically as the business of medicine, of, spreadsheets and accounting principles and things that I generally don't like. But the stuff I do like, patient safety and, the human aspect, I do. And I found that really, the more we dove into this and talked about it, the more we realized what an impact that really the whole like financial, very strict financial piece of the business of medicine is such a small part of running a successful practice. And I would imagine, running a successful department in an academic setting. So actually, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I would really enjoy the process and might have something to offer as well.
Well, I'm glad you both did it. I loved reading this issue. Listeners know that I tend to read the articles about 3 or 4 times along their way. And I love seeing the final product and the order in which the articles appear and how little nuggets of wisdom and knowledge and experience from one article find themselves in another 2 or 3 articles, even if they're not exactly about the same subject. So it's really nice, this issue. So congratulations. Let's dive into some of the articles that are here. You both have had leadership roles. And I think for trainees, we have medical students and residents and fellows who listen to this, as well as practicing otolaryngologists, and hopefully some office managers and office personnel from ENT practices will listen in. A lot of times we're told in our training that the way to be a leader is to sort of follow the academic path, and it's pretty proscribed, and you have to sit on a certain number of committees, and you have to make a tenure track or not, and you have to blah, blah, blah. The article that you put in on physician as leader includes authors Blythe, Malexidae, and Way, of which Bill Blythe is in private practice, and Sonia Malexidae and Julie Way are in academic practices, and Julie has a big social media presence. So you really picked 3 very disparate, successful leaders who are bringing their skills from different perspectives. So this article looks at leadership opportunities in private and academic practice. And Eileen, when I introduced you, I said that you were immediate past president of your group, and you are also now going to be the chief of staff of the hospital, which takes you outside of just otolaryngology and gives you the joy of talking to doctors who are unhappy from all fields. So bravo. Why should someone consider leadership to be important? Why is it something to add to your plate?
I think that many of us, by the time we get to this point in our career, and ENT, we all know, has been a very competitive specialty over the years. And most of us who get to that point of even finishing residency have kind of risen to the top, and we've found our way into leadership positions in our history, and it becomes a pretty natural part of who we are. I think that we can all find where our strengths lie and find different opportunities in leadership. And in the article that you referenced, there's a table that actually goes through different opportunities within a division or department, outside the hospital, medical center setting, as well as in professional societies. And I think it's a matter of sort of feeling what fits for our goals personally, the relationships that we have, using the networks that we have. In our case, I'll just use an example in the private practice world. We are one of the few groups in town that's independent. Everything else has been swallowed by our health system. And so we knew early on, our predecessors had been very engaged in leadership at the hospital, on the medical executive committee. I also sat on the hospital board of directors now for 5 years, so that we know what's going on and we have a voice. And that's a very important part, both, within your community, your medical center setting, your department. And then you can make a big impact beyond that. And we'll probably even talk about things like giving advice to the AMA and the RUC committee. I think it's a natural tendency for those of us. And by the time you hit mid-career, which we have, it's an opportunity to grow.
I totally appreciate what you're saying. I was speaking to the chair of one of the big academic departments, and I asked her where she learned how to speak finance at the institution level. And she actually sits on the board of a small but powerful bank in their neighborhood, and really has honed some of her leadership skills, as you said, completely outside the world of medicine, but that dovetails beautifully into what she must do as a leader in our field. I said in my little intro that you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are not just buzzwords of, du jour, and they're not checkbox, oh, I did my DEI training for the year, thank God, right? They are actually concepts that we want and need to be living and breathing in our specialty, let alone communities. And unfortunately, equal pay for equal work does not exist in much of otolaryngology in the United States. Shockingly, for such a kind and ear, nose, and penance, for such a great group of people, we're kind of mean to the women in our midst. Women in otolaryngology in the U.S. are paid on average 77 cents for the man's dollar. And this is obviously compounded and much worse when the woman also is intersectional, which means also a member of an underrepresented minority group. The American Association of Medical Colleges issued a call to action on gender equity in 2020, stating that it is a key factor in achieving excellence in medicine. So we're not talking about DEI just to be nice. We're talking about DEI so that we provide better medical care. In this issue, you guys included 2 articles on DEI, one by Litvak and Lindsay, and the other by Francis, Cabrera Muffley, Schumann, and Brown. It's interesting that you dovetailed them to the second article and the final article. And I thought it made a very beautiful arc in the composition of this clinics. I sometimes think of the issue of clinics as an old-fashioned record album, right? Where Pink Floyd had a reason for what was on side A and side B and what was the first track and the last track, right? Frankly, I'm comparing you two to Pink Floyd, which is awesome.
Thank you.
That works.
So Steve, how can the otolaryngologist looking at a position look at how DEI is factored in and how they should think about how they're getting paid? Because a lot of what we need is to get paid, right? We need to get paid well. So how do we look at the difference between an RVU or a relative value units-based system versus a salaried system? How do we make sure that if we are asked to do non-revenue generating work, but that is important, that's also factored in? Steve, we've talked about this. Women get the brunt of the sort of mothering, nurturing jobs that don't get to appear on your CV and don't get to appear in your paycheck. So let's talk a bit about that.
Let me preface it by saying I am passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it goes back a long way. In fact, it goes back to some degree to when Eileen was interviewing with us. I was excited for the first time in our small practice to have a woman on the team at the physician level that could bring that unique perspective that we needed, and we kind of all maybe knew that we needed. And it absolutely was everything we hoped for. Eileen and now Amy, our younger partner, have brought in tremendous value as a different perspective from the sort of the standard perspective we had been used to for all those years. And the second part is that systemic issues need systemic change. So before we start a war of the sexes, we need to understand that all of us are well-meaning, most of us, almost all of us are well-meaning, and the system happened while we weren't watching. So many of these issues came through, we were not paying attention because there was sameness, right? There was homogeneity in the system. There was a lot of white guys in the system. And there's no knock on them. I'm one of them, and I hope I'm not knocking myself. But the point is that nobody was preparing for people who didn't look like ourselves to come into the specialty or medicine in general. Later on, there's another article that references a recent article about a leaky pipeline. This idea of underrepresented minorities from undergraduate through to professorships and heads of department, and how much we didn't pay attention to making the system work to bring in diversity. On the pay equity specifically, You asked a question about the RVUs, and every system clearly, and we've been through a number of systems just in our little practice, every system has problems. The RVU system clearly has some, unrecognized or previously unrecognized issues. There are codes, RVU codes, that are just undervalued or overvalued. There are changes in the technology that has created a system where you can do this RVU much faster, so you can put many more of them on your schedule. And at the end of the day, you end up with more RVUs than your partner. There are differences within subspecialties. Head and neck surgery traditionally has had their RVU codes typically undervalued. Rhinology, I'm not going to say they're overvalued, but rhinologists generally do very, very well. They can put more RVUs, if you will, in a day. All of these things come into not only equity between subspecialties, but then when you begin to look at what is the rest of the work that a partner has to do, a partner in a private practice, a member of an academic department, what kind of work needs to get done and who tends to do that kind of work? And there's where many times there are important pieces of the work that keeps the department, keeps the practice alive and working well, that are not remunerated at all. And quite often, certain people tend to fall into being given the task. I mean, just on the diversity equity side, ask a professor of color whether they've been asked to be on some kind of a department or some kind of a committee that is trying to improve DEI in their university. Every one of them will say, yes, I've been appointed, I've done my work, or I've told them I couldn't do my work, but they've all been asked and assumed that they would be the ones that would be carrying the load for that. That's a way in which nobody's paying attention to what that means. And they end up doing unremunerated work that keeps them from doing other things that advances their academic career, or keeps them from doing other things within their practice that advances their RVUs, their standing in the clinic, their level of partnership, if there's a lower junior partner, senior partner, all of those kinds of things. Even a salaried system, Mayo Clinic or the VA, for instance, the Lindsay and Litvak article talks about this, that even when you look at everyone of whatever gender is salaried in the same way, yet the opportunities given for promotion, that is remunerated, non-clinical work, goes predominantly to men. And until that's recognized, until people realize and recognize that's not fair, then the system can't change. But the system can change if we examine that. And that's the wonderful thing about both of those articles. Those two articles were the ones I was most excited to get out into the universe to be examined and acknowledged.
I have to say, very frankly, it's very easy for me to see these inequities as a brown woman, with a funny last name. And the fact that somebody like you can see these inequities so very clearly warms the cockles of my heart. It really, because I think you're right. Just having women fight for themselves, or Black people fight for themselves, or whoever fight for themselves, doesn't make any sense and does not advance healthcare, which is what we're in the business of doing, right? By the Francis article talks about healthcare disparities. So, whenever we hear about the healthcare disparities, we're like, oh yeah, that affects, pediatrics, that affects, I don't know, we make up a specialty that affects. Eileen, healthcare disparities actually affect outcomes no matter where we are, right? And certainly in otolaryngology, the Francis article, table 1, gives some really good examples of somebody with sinusitis who is kicked out of their shelter and loses their antibiotic prescription, right? And that's a healthcare disparity. Certainly every otologist knows the cost of the eardrops that we're prescribing because people can't afford them. In your role now beyond otolaryngology, help physicians who already feel a bit overburdened incorporate this concept of justice, of overcoming healthcare disparities in their day-to-day.
Well, this is work that our hospital is actively engaged in, primarily right now at a board level. And I think then we're looking to move that to the rest of the folks that work, not just physicians, but the entire staff, so that we have some kind of organized plan. And I'm happy to say that our incoming board chair is former Department of Health and has just a really, really good insights and practical knowledge about some of these challenges in our community as it relates to housing insecurity and transportation issues. And every community, I mean, we have many of the same struggles, but there are also some that are unique to each community. So it's a big task. It's not something certainly that I can take on myself, but I've been part of those conversations as we try to address them at a board level. But it's hard. And to speak to, what you two were just talking about, we each have our own individual experiences of injustice and have seen those within our own patient populations and see the patchwork quilt that exists to try to get people what they need. But when you're looking at it from the standpoint of a system and how to tackle it, you do often end up at least asking for guidance and insights from folks who have lived that. But your point is well taken, both of you, that it's, that burden, that becomes a burden and it can fall on the same shoulders every time. So I think it's a balance to be struck between having those voices heard, but also making sure that everybody's sharing in the heavy lifting of that work.
Well, thank you. So let's think about what happens to the otolaryngology resident or fellow who has now finally completed their training at the very tender age of about 30 and is ready now to start working. I remember my first pregnancy was at 31 and I had, finished my residency at 28 and I was just at the end of 29 turning 30 when I finally got to start working. And then somebody at work said to me, "Oh, are you coming back to work after the baby's born?" I was like, "Oh my God, I've only worked for 9 months."
All this training, and now I'm going to quit.
I'm like, I finally got to enter the ice cream store, right? So we're pretty, long in the tooth by the time we get to start working. And I've been talking a lot to a lot of residents, and as you know, I'm a partner in a 220 member physician group of otolaryngologists and allergists in the New York, New Jersey area. And a lot of younger folks, come to many of us and ask us, for ideas. And we've been talking to them about like a 30-year decision, right? Your first job, if you think about it properly, and you think about where you want to live, and you might change within that community and you might not, but it takes a while. It takes a while to build a practice and, build a referral network. At the same time, you're perhaps growing your family and maybe buying a house. And, you're doing things that you are supposed to do as time goes on. And if you decide to move states or regions every few years, unless you're taking a locums job, it's very hard. You keep starting at zero each time. So you've put in some really good articles, finding the right job, making a major job change, e-health, telemedicine, and the authors of these articles are Hof and Fortune, and also Hesham, Grunfast, and Sarber, and Manning and Gillespie. So you've got 3 articles in here that kind of cover a lot of possible choices people can make. Can you talk to us, Eileen, about finding and landing that job, what you should look for, how you should present yourself, and then what it's like when you feel you must make a change?
Well, it's interesting because, I always thought I would go into academics, and I actually had accepted a job in an academic institution right when the big crash of 2009 happened. And I had this opportunity come up in St. Cloud, and it was closer to my family. And that's, you just, ultimately it's somewhat of a leap of faith. But I realized that it really was fortuitous because I was thinking I was going into academics because that's all I knew. And so many residents, many of them don't have that opportunity to rotate in a private practice setting and get a sense of what that's like. And there's also this obvious bias, I think, in some academic centers, that they just want people to stay in academics. I mean, it helps to promote the reputation of their program through publishing and whatnot. I think it's important that people follow their heart, because ultimately what it's about is being happy and finding what it is. That's regardless of what point you are in your career. And I think the authors did a great job of really speaking to that, that ultimately you have to ask yourself, what do you value most? What's most important to you? Is it publishing? Is it presenting? Is it home with family? Is it having control over your schedule? It's a big part of your decision. It was striking to me to read in the Hesham article about how the Comp Health survey indicated only 37% of graduates from residency programs anticipate staying in their first job. Obviously, there's a lot of change that happens, and I was in the military, and then I took this private practice job, and I have no plans to leave it. But there does become a little bit of a mid-career assessment, I think, that we all go through, and that also is kind of addressed in these articles about, is this what I'm going to continue to do? Am I going to augment my professional growth, my personal growth by embarking in a leadership opportunity or getting another degree? Or there's just myriad options, and there's no one size fits all. But what's really important, I think, when it comes down to it, whether you're at the beginning of your stage or the end, is your relationships and your network, and staying in touch with people who are mentors, and being able to have those conversations, the sort of the unpublished job opportunities. Sometimes those are the best. As much as, we can be analytical beings doing what we do, it's really important to have and maintain those relationships.
You're right. The unpublished, the sort of like, why don't you look at this? Or I just met somebody and I think they would be great to work with, kind of things. I'll tell you, I have switched several jobs in my career. I started in academic practice because, like you, I didn't know there was anything else out there. Like that's what you were supposed to do. And I did one academic job, and then I moved across the river, not my family, but my practice, for another academic job. And then I went into private practice. I just, like a crazy person, I hung a shingle on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And I was like, oh, I'm a good doctor. Patients will come. But because I hadn't moved geographically, I actually did keep my local network, my, referring network. My patients would come because it's not that hard to either cross the river or go down a few blocks. And then I joined this big practice. And the way I joined this practice was exactly as you said. I called up one of my friends and I said, hey, my lease is up and I'm looking for more space. And she's like, what's wrong with you? Come look at this. Come look at our practice. And it's such an opportunity. And this is what you can do here. And I think keeping your eyes and ears open and being willing to share, as you said, we do get these sort of mid-career, check-ins with ourselves about what it is we really want to do. I wonder, Steve, as someone like Eileen comes to interview with you, what are you looking for? I know everyone's got a million, YouTubes on how to dress and how to act on interviews. You want to know if you can trust that person with your patients when you are out of town, right?
Yep.
How do you gauge the young person maybe who does not have the experience of knowing how to run a practice, who's coming to join you?
My first checklist is, are they younger than me? Check. And are they smarter than me? Check. So Eileen met both of those, no question. So that was easy. What we're looking for, and I think this is what every leader is looking for in people they want in their department, in their university, in their practice. And that is people who are curious, people who are interested in what are you doing? How do you do that? Can I do that? So curiosity I think is one of the most important. And then clearly you kind of get a feel for work ethic. Private practice is a little different than a salaried situation typically. So you're probably looking for somebody who's a little bit more, I don't know, gung-ho. You remember the gunners, right, in college. And we're kind of looking a little bit for gunners of a certain sort, people who are really excited to get out and do work hard, be part of the team. But I think, and I'm kind of a team guy, and I think looking for a teammate. I'm looking for somebody who's going to have my back, who's going to really take on the ethos and the culture that we've worked hard to develop and make it their own. So we think our little clinic is a family. I mean, it's a 50 some member family, but it's a family. We like it when family looks out for family. When we're looking for partners, folk who like to do it on their own and they need to have their own little way of doing it, and we've had a couple of partners who came and tried to fit in and didn't work out as well. And it was generally because they needed to do it a certain way, and we already had sort of a way that we sort of do it, and they didn't fit in with that, and they recognized it as much as we did. I mean, there's all kinds of academic parts to this, but I think really we're looking for somebody that feels like they're going to fit in, like they've got the same values. They're patient-centered. They're excited to be, to participate and to be part of that team.
I just want to take a quick pause here to let our listeners know that they can receive an exclusive discount on the issue we are discussing today by visiting us.elsevierhealth.com/expert.
So let's continue this really wonderful dialogue. In right smack dab in the middle of your issue, you included 3 articles covering honesty and transparency as indispensable to the clinical mission. And this was written by Brenner, Boothman, Rushton, Bradford, Hickson, and they included Prince in part 2. The first article is on professionalism and defining an accountable professional. And I think this is a lot of what you were just saying, Steve, about the kind of professional that you are looking to add to your team. An accountable professional is one who has and shows cognitive and technical skills, effective communication, self-awareness, and respect. And all of these qualities promote teamwork. Eileen, Steve alluded to the fact that, sometimes things just don't work out. And sometimes you have to have difficult conversations. And sometimes they are with people whom you know quite well. And then sometimes they are with people, and certainly in your new role, might be with people whom you haven't interacted with as intimately as perhaps your partners in the practice. Can you talk to us as a healthcare leader on how to have a difficult conversation with a colleague?
I haven't had to yet in the role where I don't know people as well. So I'm not sure I can speak to that from any depth of experience, but certainly had to have conversations that I think my former younger self would have really shied away from. They're uncomfortable, but important. And I think the more that you have them, the more you realize that the vast majority of them, it's a learning experience for everyone. And it draws you closer to that individual that you're speaking with. The article, the first section of those articles on honesty and transparency, that they have this wonderful Vanderbilt promoting professionalism pyramid, figure 6 in that first article. It really speaks to the fact that the majority of issues that come up can be dealt with, more than 70%, and in their work, that just a peer conversation, cup of coffee, it doesn't need to get elevated to the point where somebody feels like they're being punished or penalized. It's really just a matter of, hey, let's talk this through. This is what came up, and maybe you didn't see it this way, but this is how the patient took it, or the other staff people took it, and it really does. It typically is well received, and the behavior stops, or there's an apology, or there's a positive outcome when all's said and done. Of course, if that's not effective, you can take it up the ladder. That's where the medical staff get involved, or more of a formal disciplinary action can take place. But thankfully, a more casual setting is typically effective, and has been in my experience as well.
And I think when you come to that cup of coffee conversation with a backdrop of being a person of caliber, a person who, you're not going and saying, Steve, what the heck, man? Why do you always do this, right? You're saying, hey, Steve, this is an unusual thing that somebody is saying about you, or is something going on? And I think what happens is you do give that space for someone who maybe said the wrong thing at the wrong time, or maybe, who knows. I was speaking to the ombudsperson at UC San Francisco Medical Center. And so her job is just to put out fires like all day long, right? That's like her. She just runs around in flame retardant attire, I think, spraying water on people. But she told me about a story where there was a surgeon who had complaints made by the nurses in the OR that he was being disrespectful. And, he was known to be a pretty nice guy. Like, he was known to be a normal. And she kind of had to do the cup of coffee with everybody individually. And it turned out that he had no idea that what he was saying was being perceived as disrespectful and truly did not mean it. And they ended up with that nurse group that had complained about him and him becoming like this very strong affinity group. That very like they loved each other. They chose to work with each other in the future. And I think not only can the fires be put out, but new relationships can be cultivated. But again, I think if the person approaching either of the parties is not perceived as honest or transparent, I don't think no one's going to talk. And I think that's the purpose of these 3 articles, is to understand how to incorporate that in your life. See, unfortunately, despite our best efforts, sometimes there are bad outcomes, right? So there are bad outcomes that happen because, this group and that group hate each other and nobody's talking to each other, and that's awful. But let's say everybody's talking to each other and everybody's good and the timeouts actually happen and, everything is good. But unfortunately, there are bad outcomes that occur. The second article of this group focuses on honesty and transparency as they relate to patient harm. Talk about a difficult conversation. Can you talk to us a bit about how to speak with patients and family after a harm occurred?
The word I would use to preface the honesty and transparency here is humility. And actually, I would preface many of the articles, including the DEI stuff we just talked about, with the word humility. It's not a favored word among professionals. It's not, a favored virtue among professionals. When harm comes, and I meant well, and I did my best, and I would say that 99% of us can stand up and say, I did my best here. I did what I could do. I worked with what I had, and something bad happened. Then the humility to say, I can't control everything. And even though I'm a great surgeon, this thing happened because of this, and this, or miscommunications, or whatever broke down, or even if nothing broke down and you just rolled snake eyes on that particular case. So humility to say, this doesn't usually happen to me, but this really did happen. I'm going to have to own this, and I'm going to have to swallow hard and not try to point the blame at somebody or something else. And what I really need to focus on is who's hurting here. Patients and family are hurting. They need me because I'm patient focused. I'm really in that equation. I'm the only one that can bring the medical issue and the patient focus together. So the honesty and transparency comes in when I say, okay, I'm going to swallow hard. I'm going to go talk to the patient and I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm going to be honest and transparent. I'm not going to guess at stuff that I don't know, because if parts of the case, and there usually are, I have no idea why this happened to this person. I'm not going to guess at it. I'm going to be truthful, tell them what I know, be empathetic and compassionate, and say, I am so sorry this happened to you. You must be hurting terribly. I can join with them in their emotional state. I don't have to necessarily, in fact, I probably don't want to necessarily represent myself as being at fault in one way or another, because that's going to come, right? The investigation is going to come. And then the third thing that I want to tell them is, there's going to be an investigation. We're going to keep you involved and informed as the investigation goes on. I'm going to participate 100% and be honest in the whole process. And we want you to know that process is going to go forward. Nobody's going to cover anything up. You're going to find out what we find out. And I think if you're honest, you're humble, you're transparent, and you're patient focused, and you're inviting them to participate even in this in this very hard path, we're all going to walk this together. Patients will support you. They will continue to believe in you. They understand that we're human.
Yeah, Howard House used to say, if you have a bad outcome, that's the person you see as often as they need to be seen. we all want to hide our mistakes. Yeah, sweeping something under the carpet is a phrase because that's what we would like to do. His point was bring them in, make them the last patient of the day so you have plenty of time to sit and talk with them, and let them know that you're still their doctor, even if something bad happens. He said this to me in 1993, and it's something I think about, not that bad things happen to my patients a lot, but it's something that I think about a lot.
I always think of the term, I need to lean into this. I need to, your initial gut is, like you said, to just want to not talk about it, sweep it under the carpet, but that is not what's best for us either. We walk around with this tremendous guilt, right? So we're so much better off, and our patients are so much better off if we can just be transparent from the get-go. It's a hard conversation to start, absolutely, but in the end, it's really so much better for all of us. There's this concept of moral injury. I don't know if we're going to get to that, but it's really germane, right? Because if you aren't embracing that honesty and that transparency, you have a moral injury as an individual, as a physician, and you carry that with you, and it takes its toll in terms of your burnout.
Right. And I think it leads directly into the third article in this series, which really talks about resilience. And I think for us to be aware, it talks particularly about collective resilience, which I really enjoyed learning about as reading this. And it was outlined in figure 14 there. And I'm just going to guide our listeners to go check it out, because if something bad happens to one of our patients, not only do we need to embrace the patient, but our partners, our team needs to embrace us and needs to understand where our headspace is at that time. Give us I hate to say the word love in a business discussion, but give us the love and the grace to know that these things hurt us, right? And that we will need, and we may not be able to say it the first week or the second week or the third week. It may take us a while to talk about it, but then we need to lend an ear. So I'm going to move to now something much more concrete and scary, Steve, which is all these payment models. Like, oh my God. So you can't talk about the business of otolaryngology without talking about how we get paid. And certainly because this is the US clinics, we're going to really talk about the US systems. So can you tell us, in the article you wrote on new payment models, you talk about a lot of stuff. And I have to tell everybody, oh man, this is worth reading. And for residents, it is worth reading in your residency so that you're not blindsided when you get out. Because no matter what type of practice you go into, this affects you.
Right.
So Steve, can you talk to us about MIPS, which stands for Merit-Based Incentive Payment System? Can you talk about its categories, its scoring, its adjustments, and where does a clinical data registry like Regent from the Academy fit in?
I'd rather talk about the Canadian system, okay? Because it's so much simpler. But we have a very complicated system in the US, and this is discussing primarily Medicare, of course, because MIPS and the APMs, which are the advanced payment models, or alternate payment models rather, are mostly, at least, created by CMS and the CMS Innovation Center.
CMS stands for Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services in the United
CMS,
States. I'm just going to define it for people who are not as in-depth as you are.
And generally, we just talk about Medicare, because Medicare basically creates the umbrella under which all the other pieces fit in, the Medicaid piece and then the others. Basically, a number of years ago in the 2000s, there was a push from a number of different directions to modify how physicians were paid, with the idea that we were going to move toward paying for value rather than paying for volume. So value over volume. And out of that, Congress enabled Medicare, CMS, to create basically two ways to account for quality and cost. And one of them is MIPS, and the other is APMs, or the advanced payment, or alternate payment models. We'll focus just on MIPS. In short, this is a way for a physician who works with Medicare patients to account for the quality of their work, the way that they are improving their practice's ability to care for those patients, the way that they are working on interoperability between clinic sites, how they can share clinical data on a patient safely between physicians who are caring for this patient, and ultimately how much they are charging or how much they are costing that Medicare recipient. And by the way, Medicare does not like you to talk about patients. They want you to talk about Medicare beneficiaries. So we don't apparently care for Medicare patients. We care for beneficiaries. But anyway, I guess insurance companies of any sort, whether U.S. government or otherwise, they like to think of beneficiaries instead of patients. I can't get over the patient word. So basically, actually last year, as of 2021, the government assigned a certain percentage of the score, if you will, for each of those four elements that I talked about. So last year, 30% of the score would be determined by the quality measures. And I won't even go into details on that. 15% was on practice improvement, improving the quality of the experience for the patient. 25% interoperability, or what was called meaningful use. Are you using electronic data to care for your patient and share information as appropriate with other practitioners? And 30% was on cost. And then those scores are put into some sort of a hopper, and your clinic is given a percentage score. But there's a figure in the article that looks at if you had a score from 0 to 20, or 1% to 25th percentile, you got nothing back, but you didn't pay anything in. If you got from 26% to 76%, you shared a small amount of savings, and then the outliers to with high quality, high cost savings shared more. So that's basically how MIPS works. The only really good way for a small group like ours to compile all of that data, because a lot of it is very data intensive, is by one of two means: either to not participate in MIPS, but rather to participate in an APM like an ACO. An ACO is an accountable care organization. It's a advanced payment model, one of several that CMS has set up for larger health systems to do the same kind of quality and cost work, value work, if you will, that we're talking about under the MIPS. And it turns out our practice is lucky enough to have a health system that has an ACO that has included us. So all of our scoring and all of our data measuring and capturing is done by the health system. Yay. But for most of us in otolaryngology, MIPS is the way we report this quality and cost data. The ACO does your work for you. If you're going through MIPS and you're a smaller office like ours, then it's very helpful to have a data acquisition and analysis organization, which our academy has created wonderfully under Regent, and then it's available for any of our practitioners to participate. They not only collate that data on an aggregate sense and on an individual physician and individual practice sense, but they also are setting up quality measures. In other words, they're not saying, okay, CMS, what do we need to measure as quality? They're saying, this is what otolaryngologists should be measuring for quality. So they're not only trying to reach the bar, they're actually setting the bar on our behalf. And so it's nice to have an organization that really understands otolaryngology, that is helping to set what those quality measures, what those cost measures are that you have to report whether you like it or not.
The way we report what we do for patients is we report by codes, right? So we have these several digit codes. Whatever we do should match whatever diagnosis we think we've done it for. And I think really getting coding down correctly is an art. It's really important not to down code if you like to eat, or not to up code if you like to eat, because if you up code, that money will be taken back at some point and you will stop eating. There's a really good article by Lynn and Wagasback, Eileen. And as Steve said, this is all Medicare, but frankly, as Medicare goes, do all the privates, right? So everybody basically follows the Medicare rules sooner or later. Can you give us, Eileen, some highlights on correct coding for otolaryngology?
Yeah, I think the part that was most interesting to me was the use of an unlisted code. I know that's always up for debate, when to do that or when to try to find something that's similar, maybe not quite. And particularly, I do a fair amount of skull-based work, and I mean, it depends on which surgeon I'm working with, how they want to code it. It's still something that is a challenge with skull-based. The authors really emphasize the importance of investing the time and energy on the front end in terms of getting prior authorization for a planned procedure, using an unlisted code, but basically supporting evidence along with that as to why they would recommend a certain level of reimbursement, how it may be similar, but not trying to use a code where it's not really what you've done. Because if you do that, you are at risk of an audit. And if you're audited, that money can be clawed back. And then, like you said, Sujana, you don't get to eat as much. So the other point that I think was very important in this article, and such alphabet soup, Steve, I'm glad you got to speak on your article and I didn't have to, because every other word is an acronym. But there is this thing called the RUC, right? So that's part of the AMA's update committee. So they review codes and they survey different specialties to come up with a value for that procedure that you're doing. And as a specialty, we may be asked to participate in those surveys. And they're really important because it really does impact every single one of us, all the otolaryngologists in our country. And so if we ignore those, you just lost your opportunity to have a seat at the table and a voice.
I know when I'm training residents, the place where they can actually get some facility with coding is actually at the VA, where you have to code and you have to link your code to your diagnosis. And I think trainees should really take that seriously. As Steve, you said, everything is trial and error with a lot of error in the beginning. And I ended up doing a lot of self-training when I started my career to try to figure out what this new language meant and what should be done. A lot of times, doctors don't like talking about finance, and they will talk about it in some weird abstract, like you said, with spreadsheets and so on and so forth. There is an article that you included that you wrote, Eileen, with Lisa Resserman and Koprek called Otolaryngology Business Finance 101. And this really looks at revenue cycle management, which immediately puts you to sleep. Like that.
Eyes roll back.
Oh my God, this is what this is. So revenue cycle management, insurance contract negotiations, you'd rather put bamboo shoots under your nails, and benchmark. But all of these are really important because this really reflects the high level view of a healthy otolaryngology practice in terms of being able to keep the doors open, pay your staff, pay your overhead, take care of your patients. And then coming down so that each aspect is optimized. So why don't we just have you explain to us what makes up a revenue cycle?
Basically what it is, it's a description of a claim. It's funny because when I first came into this role as president, I want to understand from the time a patient makes a phone call to make an appointment until the time money is deposited in our account. What happens? I was getting pieces here, pieces there. I was talking to people in the business office, and all of a sudden my business person goes, "Oh, you're talking about revenue cycle management." I was like, "That is name. Oh, that's what it is. Okay. Yeah, now we're getting somewhere." So then you start to understand things like clearinghouses and why we have those. But really important for all of us to understand is that we need to be timely in getting our charts done and getting our charts signed. And every person who touches that chart in our office has a really important role to play, because if that bill, that claim gets sent to an insurance company and there's an error and it gets kicked back and it doesn't get fixed in a timely fashion, that's thousands of dollars down the drain. And we've learned that the hard way in our clinic, that if you don't invest in people who are on your accounts receivable side watching for those being rejected and working those appeals in a timely fashion. You get into this dreaded term of it's a timely file write-off. You have 3 months for a lot of insurance companies. And in the big scheme of things, that is not a lot of time.
Thank you. I love this article. Again, self-taught, and I think reading this showed me how much I actually managed to learn over the time and how much I still have to learn over time. And time is getting shorter for me, so I better hurry up and learn, right? Speaking and having a lot of fun speaking about the business of otolaryngology with the guest editors of the February 2022 issue of Clinics, Drs. Steve Kragel and Eileen Dower. You can find all of the issues of Otolaryngologic Clinics of North America in your or your institution's library and online at www.oto.theclinics.com. You can find podcasts for just about every single issue in the last 4+ years at that same website or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's talk about a couple of the other articles you guys included. So one is called The Business Case for Quality and Safety by Shaw, Reinhardt, and Cronin. And the other is called Marketing Your Practice by Kim, Tyler, and Chang. And whether you're in solo practice, group practice, academics, employed, practicing safe and high quality otolaryngology clearly and positively affects the bottom line. Obviously, when your patients do well, not only are they doing fine, but they're, they send grandma, they send the lady who cuts their hair, they send other people to you, your practice thrives. That article by Shaw et al. Is really very good, talking about why quality and safety are important, not just, again, to tick a button or to make your MIPS percentages, but actually to thrive and grow in your practice. I wanted to talk to you guys about the Marketing Your Practice article. And I know Dale Tyler has actually helped a lot of members of the Academy learn how to navigate the big bad world of social media. But whether you're in a small market, a large market, patients will only come and colleagues will only refer if they know you're there. And in this article, the authors talk about using social media to market oneself and sort of the do's and don'ts when it comes to responding to patient reviews. So, everybody reviews everything. Every time we go to a restaurant, everyone in nobody in my family just goes to a restaurant. They're all on their phones looking up the Yelp reviews. I'm like, oh my God, why don't we just try it? But that makes me a dinosaur and everybody else is normal. So, Steve, can you talk to us about what happens when we get good reviews and when we get, unfortunately, which we all get, bad reviews by patients?
So first off, as a dinosaur, I have to sadly tell you all and all of you dinosaurs listening that even those of us who are dinosaurs who are looking for a physician are using online search engines. The vast majority of our Medicare patients, our elderly patients, are looking online. So it's not just the 20 somethings, 30 somethings, the millennials and the Gen Zs. Everybody's looking online. And so if you're not managing your online presence, it's being managed for you. If you've not Googled yourself and your practice, that's a very eye-opening thing to do. And you may find things there that you cannot believe, and they've maybe been out there for several years and you aren't aware. So it's very important. I mean, this is the future. In fact, almost the entirety of an article on marketing your practice dealt with online presence. It did not talk about the yellow pages. There was not a single time that they used the word yellow pages. Okay.
How many
So
members
as a
of our
dinosaur,
audience even know what is the yellow pages
I know,
anymore?
right? But us dinosaurs do. We know. And we
I
used
think
to
we
spend
just
money on
stopped
that
paying
stuff.
for yellow page ads.
I know.
Like
Isn't that horrible? Anyway, so online presence, it's clearly, and everybody's online, right? I'm on Facebook looking, I'm on Instagram looking. I even actually know how to Snapchat.
Wow.
I know,
My
right?
kids won't
Right?
let me.
My
My kids won't
yeah.
let me.
Yeah, oh, no, not with them. No way. Anyway, so we won't get into that. And so realize this is advice coming from a dinosaur, but reviewing an article that was extremely well written on this issue. All of us worry as physicians about the whole HIPAA patient protection portion. Okay, we're concerned about sharing information that shouldn't be shared. So that's very important. But it's also important to be there and to be out available online with your patients. When you get a review, and you don't even have to be online to get a review, right? Google will put your website out there, and people can make a review, and you don't even know that the website exists. Healthgrades is out there. You've got an account on Healthgrades. You don't even know it, and people are rating you. If you're not aware of it, those grades are out there. When you do have a situation like that, and you're trying to deal with a difficult review, it's not different than dealing what we just talked about with a patient who had a bad outcome, a colleague who is having a difficulty, my own issue if I'm having problems with burnout. It's the same basic human interaction, right? On page 133, on managing unsatisfied patients, a wonderful acronym called HEART, and I'll just be very brief with it. Hear, allow the patient to talk. Empathize, E, name the patient's emotion and validate it. A is apologize. A sincere apology can be very powerful. R is respond. Many complaints stem from unmet expectations. Reestablish an opportunity to set, meaningful and beneficial mutual expectations. And then T, thank the patient for the chance to correct the problem. Again, you're just reaching out to a real human being in a compassionate way to recognize and correct a misunderstanding, a mistake, or whatever it might be. It's not different than any other interaction, maybe more difficult for those of us who aren't as accomplished online.
Yeah, I agree. And like everything else, not responding in the heat of the moment. We were all taught to count to 10, right? We were all taught to go sit in timeout for a second and just kind of take a breath. And I think that's very, very important. I think it's also really important. The patient can say whatever they want about us and their experience. We cannot divulge protected health information, which includes whether or not the patient was seen in our office. Right. So just be really careful. Don't start an online, Twitter battle with some of your patients. It's definitely not worth it. But sometimes bad things happen, Steve, and somehow you got all the bad thing questions, and I'm sorry about this. But you did write the article on malpractice woes, and I love the way you titled it because it is really, Lake Wobegon. You wrote this with Strobel, and unfortunately, lawsuits are a fact of medical life in the United States. 34% of doctors overall have been sued, and the longer one stays in practice, the higher the chance that they will get sued. 2/3 of surgical specialists over the age of 55 report having been sued, which is a huge number. 3 out of 4 of those lawsuits end favorably for the physician, which means the physician is not found at fault. But certainly that comes with some significant cost. Can you talk to us about the other costs, not the cost of hiring a lawyer, taking the time to do the depositions, but what is the actual cost to the physician and perhaps even their practice parameters once they've been sued?
I hearken back to what Eileen mentioned a little bit ago about moral injury. And here's a situation where moral injury could be a piece of this, because we're out there putting it all out for our patients. We're doing our very best, and something bad happens. And hopefully by the processes we've talked about earlier in the episode, we can alleviate that. We can avoid, by being transparent and honest and humble, we can avoid an action. But these lawsuits are so random that physicians need to be prepared. This was actually the absolute first article I determined to write. I said, I'm going to write this article because people need to hear, and they need to be enabled to experience what they experience, to label it, to know what it is, to know that they're not alone, that this, that happens a lot, and to the best people that they know. This is not something that happens to the bad apples in the bottom of the barrel. This happens to great surgeons all over the country. And yet we don't talk about it. Which that song just goes over and over in my head anyway, so I had to bring it up.
Beautiful. That is beautiful. It is a high mark in the Otolaryngologic Clinics of North America podcast.
It pops in my head too as soon as you said we don't talk about it.
I know.
No.
So I wanted to talk about it because I wanted to release it and liberate it. And if that helps anybody to go through this terrible kind of an ordeal with understanding that somebody else has been there and it's okay. You can get through this. As a resident, I had a very seemingly superfluous interaction with a patient that my team was working with. And later on, I was named in a lawsuit against mostly my professor. But anyway, that was hard and nobody talked about it. My professor didn't talk to me about it. My fellow residents that were also named in the suit. And it was settled and details are unimportant. The point was I suffered basically by myself. My wife knew about it. I knew about it. I didn't even want to tell my partners that I was joining as a brand new attending. I didn't want to tell them that I'd gotten sued, even though it had been settled, or not settled, but it had been sort of thrown out. I didn't want to tell anybody. I felt terrible. Only bad doctors get sued. And I hadn't even gotten into practice. I was worried that they might not even accept me and, tear up my contract. It was a very unpleasant experience. And I, worked through it. Did it change my practice? Because I think you were asking a little bit about that question. Yes, it changed my practice. I was a little bit more conservative. I got a few more CT scans than I might have. I ran it by a few of my partners more than I might have. I chose to watch instead of operate on a few cases that I otherwise might have. I did the calculus in my head a little bit more carefully. Did that make me a better physician? Maybe. I don't know. It made me a more careful and a more cautious one. And maybe that's okay, but maybe that's not what it should have accomplished. And whatever it accomplished, I accomplished it, sadly, on my own with no support other than my wife. Fast forward a number of years, I had a more recent episode, and Constellation is the name of the company. It's a malpractice insurance company, swooped in with a lot of resources. I felt very cared for. I felt very validated in my practice, in my approach to this. I was given opportunity actually to have meaningful conversations with the plaintiff to try to resolve the situation. And ultimately it was also set aside for whatever lack of evidence or whatever you want to say. But the bottom line was it was a completely different experience for me this time around because I felt like somebody had my back. And what I'm trying to say, I guess, to any listeners who may face this in the future is you're not alone. This doesn't happen just to the bad apples. And your colleagues want to be there and support you through this. They can't know that if you don't tell them, if you don't talk about it. So if in doubt, get a trusted colleague, talk to them, talk through it. Quite often, malpractice companies will help you by having practitioners, many times they're psychiatrists, but many times not, who are willing to talk with you. And it was a very good experience to be able to talk through that with a psychiatrist and just hear that validation that you're not alone. This is not the only time this has ever happened. All the things you're feeling, the anger, the feeling of being betrayed, all of those things are very, very common. It's valid for you to feel that and to go through that. It was a much, much better opportunity for me to learn.
I appreciate your candor in writing this article because it is very frightening experience. The lawyers have also changed. We used to always be like, it was dogma, the earth is flat, don't ever apologize, right? And it was always, and we've been saying for the past hour, apologize if something bad happens, or not even if the patient perceives that something has happened, apologize. We never want a patient to leave our office feeling anything but the best that we can help them feel. Even though it's a horrible experience, it is one that is deal with more. nowadays. We have a couple more articles to talk about. I really appreciate all the time that you guys are spending with me. You know, we did mention that nobody really talks about Bruno, and nobody talks about money, right? So we talk about, whatever, this code pays this and that code pays that in sort of this abstract fashion. But we don't talk about the fact that it is a 30, 35, 40-year plan. And at the end of it, we'd like to have, managed our family, whatever that entails, as best as we can. I ended up with 4 children. And so that meant 4 college educations and 4 chances to help young people start their lives, right? So, and then at the end, I'd like to enjoy my retirement in some fashion. So this year for Women in Otolaryngology Day, which every year is March 8th for everybody who needs to know, my practice and I hosted a dinner that we themed Women Physicians as Wealth Builders. And we really talked turkey about money. We just talked about, hey, if you leave early because you want to let your babysitter who makes X per hour off an hour earlier, this is what you have left on the table by not seeing those patients for that hour. And I think until you know the actual monetary value of your time, I'm like, wow. So what we found was, even in my practice, which is really, really transparent, like I can tell you today what every single one of my partners and associates made last month to the penny. But we are finding that the men in our practice actually earn a huge amount of money more than the average woman in the practice, because the women are also juggling the childcare, the birthday party, the whatever. I remember somebody asked me to bake for a bake sale, and I'm like, why? Do you want to die? Like, can I just can I just buy something? So if a woman or a person, has to be out the door at 4:30, and somebody needs to be seen at 4:30, the other person sees it. And if that person knows that commitment is costing them, let's say, $100,000 a year, maybe they'll think twice about that choice, right? You have an article you included on managing your practice and planning for retirement by Lung, by KJ Lee, and by Jin. And I think one of the things they talked about is protocols in the practice for how the staff should act, how the physician should act. Do you have stuff like that in your practice, Eileen?
I really enjoyed that, and it brought home memories of KJ Lee's Essentials of Otolaryngology, just that very bullet point, like, here are the highlights, perfect. Get right to the point. I love it. You really could look at specifically, I'm kind of thinking about new partners and physicians and how we run our own practice and ourselves. It's very patient-centered. It's very, this is how you respond in a timely fashion to questions. And these are the things that are okay to delegate. These are the things that are not. You don't delegate bad news to your nurse to tell the patient. Came back to me sort of this mantra at Mayo, which was the needs of the patient come first. That was the culture that was driven into all of us, and something that I think we very much have in our current culture. The other thing that really it brought home to me, and also from personal experience, is being a values-driven organization, not just about the patient specifically, but also, integrity is a really important value to us. And we live that as physicians. We model that for our staff. We have our staff accountable to that. And it seems very formulaic. And when our HR person first started talking about how important it was to be values driven, I kind of rolled my eyes like, oh my God, I'm so tired of talking about. But it really does impact morale, and it really does give you that North Star. And so I saw a lot of those echoes in that portion of the article. Kind of what Steve was talking about in looking for a new partner. Be kind, be compassionate, be attentive, be honest, those kinds of basics, but in a really granular fashion, as only KJ Lee can do.
And of course, we are not giving investment advice here, but how do you help your young associates or partners, or as they approach middle life, plan? Like, what are the ways they can plan so that their retirement is in fact comfortable after a a really good lifetime of hard work.
I've relied on advice from my partners, just from personal risks and benefits that they've taken over the years. We also have an organization that does our retirement plan for our company, that works with us as individuals and knows our business so well that it's a really good way for them to say, well, when you have this investment in your surgical center, this is the type of return you see. So maybe you want to have a portion of your income into that and a portion into something that's maybe diversified, I guess is the word everyone likes. In this article, though, there's a section on trust planning. And I found that really interesting because I haven't done that yet. I'm ashamed to say. I mean, we have a will, but we haven't really gotten into sort of the trust planning. I felt like I didn't know enough to say, okay, this is what I want to do, but it gives me a little bit of understanding of the language of, again, this article is not intended for people to say, okay, I'm taking this to the bank, but here's the questions you might want to ask. This is the definition or a general idea of this concept, so that you go into those conversations with some nice background information.
And the second article on financial considerations is about managing loans and debt and saving and investing. And it's written by Shaw, McKinnon, and Hicks. And we know that medical students graduate with a lot of debt these days. And that debt compounds during residency because there's just no way on a resident salary, if you're also eating, which is apparently the only thing I enjoy to do. But there's no way. So they're starting their careers, they're starting their working lives. It's not at all uncommon to have a young physician graduate with $100, $200, even $300,000 in debt that they are now trying to figure out how to restructure or pay back. As we said earlier, this is also the time that you're perhaps making your family, starting your family, maybe buying a home. And as we get older, maybe taking care of ailing relatives, parents, for example, or maybe yourself if something happens. What's the broad overview of this article, which I actually found really eye-opening in a lot of its advice?
In a big picture, we can certainly see systemic issues with medical school and residency financing coming into play here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the issues that we have are systemic issues because in order to go through and matriculate at all these various levels, there's an investment involved there. And sometimes a physician who would rather go into a specialty that didn't remunerate as well is almost forced to go into a surgical specialty that remunerates better because they have such an enormous load of debt that they're feeling like they have to be able to repay. And it's sad that sometimes a new physician has to make a choice, whether it's subspecialty within ENT or whether it's a surgical specialty versus a non-surgical specialty, strictly because of the enormous level of debt that they have had to accrue in order to get where they are. It's another systemic problem, and it's far beyond our capacity to discuss it. But once you're in this situation, this wonderful situation, by the way, when I was 31, I got my first real job, and it was my dream job, and it's the same job I've got right now. I was so happy. But I had very little understanding of finances. I knew what a mortgage was. I knew what a loan repayment was because I kept getting these, letters. You have to start repaying your loans. So I had good fortune of having very smart partners. And so always be curious, as we talked about, be curious, be humble, ask questions of your senior partners, ask what they did. Ask what how they can help you. The distilled message, and it's fabulous. You need to read the article because you're not going to get the nuggets, the pearls, without reading it. But debt management is tough. And that's number one. The issues of repayment and the timing of repayment, the possibility of forgiveness, because there are programs. Eileen, you mentioned the armed forces. I think you were in the Air Force, and they helped with some of that repayment. So there's, a variety of ways, and there are places you can go that have extreme need. the Indian Health Service and other places like that where you can go and get loan repayment for that. There are other programs as well. Refinancing, Sujana, you mentioned that, refinancing, because sometimes you can pull all of these disparate loan repayments together. And if your bank is willing to deal with you, that you can often get a slightly better percentage as far as the interest that's charged. You can get a better repayment plan. And then beyond that, and once the repayment plan is sort of underway, the next step is budgeting. And so this quick little 50, 30, 20% concept. 50% of your budget should be on living expenses, 30% discretionary, and 20% savings. Well, the 20% savings, when you're in loan repayment, every loan you repay is essentially saving money, right? Because if you let them run and try to save money on the side, you're probably not going to come out ahead. But once you've gotten those underway or underway toward being paid, then of course, having a savings plan for the future is important. Retirement planning is extremely important. Start early. Everybody's seen those charts where, $100 when you're 20 years old becomes, I don't know how much, a lot of money when you're 65. So early is better. So retirement planning is very important. And again, you're probably not going to do day stock trading and make your retirement, right? You're going to need somebody who can tell you what are the best options, how to diversify, how to dollar cost average, all the things that are important in making sure that your little nest egg grows towards retirement. And then finally, they talk about insurance. And I think I've never seen a list of so many different kinds of insurance. It was a wonderful discussion of all the various insurances and the importance of each one and the necessity for each.
So, this has been really wonderful. I want to congratulate you again, both of you, Steve Craigle and Eileen Dower, for putting together a wonderful article and also spending the time to discuss these topics with me today. This issue of Otolaryngologic Clinics of North America, published in February 2022, and really covers the concepts that are needed to enhance the business side of otolaryngology in a humane and ethical, compassionate, patient or person-centered way. Really, I could not have imagined putting together a better compilation of topics and authors. You can find all the articles that we've discussed and all issues of Otolaryngologic Clinics of North America at www.oto.theclinics.com. You can find all our podcasts there or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much, Steve and Eileen, for putting together this issue and spending the time with me to talk about it and for sharing your personal insights in addition to what the authors have written. So thanks so much.
Thanks for inviting us. It's been really fun.
Thank you.
And next time somebody asks me to bake a cake, I'm going to ask them if they want to die. I love it.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Otolaryngologic Clinics podcast. For an exclusive discount on the issue we discussed today, focusing on business of otolaryngology, visit us.elsevierhealth.com/expert. Otolaryngologic Clinics is available for individual print subscription with accompanying online access or individual online-only access, and is also available on Elsevier electronic platforms Clinical Key and Science Direct. For more information on this series and our nearly 60 other titles spanning all medical disciplines, visit info.theclinics.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and subscribe to the Otolaryngologic Clinics podcast on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.